Hello and welcome. So, a lot of us celebrate International Women's Day, right? But do you really know the story behind it? It's a surprising one, and honestly, a pretty revolutionary one. Let's dig in.
You know, when you think of March 8th, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it, flowers and nice greeting cards, almost like a second Mother's Day? Or is it something else? Something rooted in protest and political struggle, maybe even revolution? Well, the real story is probably not what you're expecting.
So this whole thing really started for me with a feeling of, confusion. I got this e-card in my inbox. It had this cartoon woman, lipstick, flowers, butterflies, all wishing me a Happy Women's Day. Then another one shows up. This time it's all pink tulips. And it just got me thinking. For a lot of people, this day has become all about private greetings and gifts. But that's just the latest chapter in a really long and frankly, kind of wild story of transformations for this holiday.
Okay, so to really get it, we have to rewind, like way back, over a century ago, back to a time when this day had absolutely nothing to do with tulips and everything to do with radical politics. Yeah, its origins are deep in the socialist movement.
So check this out. It all starts in Chicago, back in 1908. The U.S. Socialist Party organizes the first Women's Day for what they called the Female Workers' Cause. But it wasn't international, not yet. That happens 2 years later, in 1910. A German socialist, Clara Zetkin, stands up at a conference in Copenhagen and says, hey, we should make this an annual international thing. And you know what? The idea just took off. It spread like wildfire. By 1911, you have the very first official International Women's Day, and it was huge. It just exploded all across Europe.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, because there was a whole political strategy behind this. See, socialists back then, they thought real women's liberation would only happen after a full-blown class revolution. They kind of looked at feminism, with its big focus on getting the vote, as a distraction, something for the middle class. But, and this is the key part, they were also getting a little nervous. The suffrage movement was getting really popular, and it was pulling in a lot of working-class women. So, they made a strategic move. They decided to adopt the cause of suffrage themselves, basically to bring those women back into the socialist camp. The argument was, sure, the vote is important, but it's just a tool, a means to an end, not the final goal. Pretty clever, right?
And boy, did that strategy work. I mean, that first event in 1911, it was an absolute blockbuster. We're talking more than 1 million people, all across Austria, Germany, Switzerland. They were out there, marching, holding meetings. Just to give you an idea of the scale, the Austro-Hungarian Empire alone had over 300 separate demonstrations. This wasn't some small gathering. No way. This was a massive, continent-spanning movement, right from the very beginning.
But then, just as this incredible momentum was building, the world changed. Huge global events were about to step in, and they would completely fracture the solidarity that the whole thing was built on. And in the process, they'd give the day a brand new, revolutionary meaning, one that would echo for decades.
And that event was World War I. When the war broke out in 1914, it was just a massive blow to the movement. That international collaboration, the very heart of the day's success, it pretty much fell apart overnight. Socialist women were suddenly deeply divided. Some got caught up in the nationalist war effort, while others, including Clara Zetkin, fiercely protested the war. It was a huge split, and it pushed many, like her, to leave the old parties and fully embrace communism.
So, fast forward a few years into this chaotic war. It's 1917, and this is when International Women's Day becomes the actual spark for one of the most defining events of the entire 20th century. In St. Petersburg, Russia, working-class women just had enough. They were fed up with the food shortages, totally exhausted by the horrors of the war. So on March 8th, they took to the streets, and their demand was so simple, yet so incredibly powerful: bread and peace.
And here's the thing, that one demonstration, it couldn't be stopped. It just kept growing and growing and growing until, just a few days later, the Tsar himself was forced to step down. The Russian Revolution had officially begun. And because of that single event on March 8th is why we celebrate on that date. It was forever cemented as the day, tying the holiday directly to massive revolutionary change.
So, what happens after the revolution? Well, the day's identity takes another sharp turn. In 1922, Lenin makes it an official communist holiday in the new Soviet Union. From there, it gets adopted by communists in places like China and Spain. And then, after World War II, it really solidifies its new role. It becomes this big, state-sponsored holiday across the entire communist world, celebrating women's contributions to the state. So while the day was becoming this big official thing in the East, it was kind of fading away in the West. I mean, many women had won the right to vote, so some of that initial fire was gone.
For decades, it was pretty much forgotten outside of communist circles. But that was not the end of the story, not by a long shot.
Because then came the 1960s and 70s. With them, second wave feminism. A whole new generation of activists basically rediscovered March 8th and its radical roots. Now, interestingly, it never quite caught on again in the United States in the same way. But in Europe, European feminists totally embraced it. It became their day to rally for all the big issues: equal pay, reproductive rights, childcare, you name it.
And this, you guessed it, created another split. So now you have these two completely different paths emerging. On one side, you have the European feminists. They were all in on its radical history, even renaming it Women's International Day of Struggle. It was a day for protest, for making demands. But then, on the other side, you have the United Nations. They officially recognized the day in 1977, but they framed it in a much softer way. For the UN, it was a time to reflect on progress, to celebrate acts of courage, really carefully stepping away from all that messy socialist and revolutionary history.
And that pretty much brings us right up to today. Because none of these historical layers, not the socialist roots, the communist chapter, the feminist rebirth, or the institutional one, none of them ever really went away. Instead, they've all kind of piled on top of each other, creating this one day with a super complex and, let's be honest, often contradictory legacy.
I mean, just think about what March 8th looks like around the world today. It's truly a mosaic of its own past. In many former communist regions, it's a public holiday. In Western Europe, especially places like Spain, it's a day for huge feminist demonstrations. Travel to developing countries and you'll see activist marches. In Italy, it's a day where men give women yellow mimosas. And then, back in the United States, it's often back to where we started: e-cards and flowers. The day is somehow all of these things at the exact same time.
So it's been a tool for workers' rights, a spark for a literal revolution, a state-sponsored holiday, a day of fierce feminist struggle, and yeah, a commercialized day of celebration. It holds all of that history within it, which really just leaves one final question for you to think about. This March 8th, what part of that long, complicated, and totally surprising story will you be celebrating?